This is AWC in Conversation. I'm Joey Clark, an ecologist and science communicator based in Sydney, and I live and work on Gadigal country and pay my respects to traditional owners and Indigenous ranger groups that we work with around Australia. Today, I'll be joined by wildlife ecologist Dr Laurence Berry, joining us from Scotia Wildlife Sanctuary in Western New South Wales, and we'll be discussing our project at Mallee Cliffs National Park. As many of you will know, in 2016, AWC entered into a historic partnership with the New South Wales government to help deliver conservation at two sites in New South Wales, in the Pilliga and at Mallee Cliffs. And it's part of the New South Wales government's Saving Our Species program. So AWC was engaged to reintroduce locally extinct mammal species across both of those sites. And to do that, we've had to establish two large feral predator-free areas to enable those locally extinct mammals to be returned. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Laurence Berry. Laurence, what's the weather like at Scotia today?
Good morning, Joey. Nice to be here. It's a beautiful, cool day here at Scotia.
What's your outlook from the research centre there?
I don't know if you're getting much of a view there. It's pretty bright. Out the front. Let's go for a walk. It's just the general base here at Scotia. I don't know if you guys can see much. Yeah.
So for
might keep your eyes out and see a nail tail hopping around.
That's right. Anyone who's been there will know that you're actually inside that 8,000 hectare feral predator-free area. There are numbats running around in the daytime, occasionally bridled nail-tail wallabies, bilbies at night. So a special place to be. No, Laurence, you've been with AWC for 4 years as a wildlife ecologist, working on these partnership projects in New South Wales. But before that, you did a PhD on fire ecology. Do you want to talk a little bit about that work? Where was your research based?
Yeah, no worries, Joe. Yeah, I started off doing a PhD in landscape ecology with a focus on the recovery of fauna in the Mountain Ash forests just east of Melbourne around Marysville following the 2009 Black Saturday fires there. So the project specifically looked at the spatial ecology of birds and arboreal mammals in those landscapes, looked at how fires burnt at that time and then what the consequences were of the spatial patterns of those burns on the subsequent recovery of fauna.
So looking at refuges within the burnt areas, and is that relevant to much of the work you're doing now? Have you been able to bring that experience to bear?
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly relevant at the moment, given the large fires that we've had right across the country. The sort of study of refuges itself and the mechanisms of faunal persistence in landscapes following disturbance are transferable to a range of scenarios that AWC deals with and the conservation sector deal with more broadly. So yes, certainly those skills are very applicable. And following that work, I also did a lot of involvement with long-term monitoring in those forests and in other long-term monitoring programs around Victoria and New South Wales, and those skills contributed enormously to setting up the monitoring programs around the two New South Wales projects that we've got going on.
Yeah, we might come to that next. So for those of you who aren't familiar, these sites are quite different. So the Pilliga is up in the northwest slopes, sort of central northern New South Wales, I guess. The closest town is Narrabri, and that's the largest intact bit of forest west of the Great Divide in New South Wales. So a really significant area. And you were there for the first 2 years of that project. So what were you trying to establish in those early couple of years at the Pilliga?
Yeah, so in the Pilliga, we're working in the northwest part. It's about 36,000 hectare section of the forest. It's dominated by ironbarks, but it's relatively heterogeneous once you get in there. That part of the Pilliga is slightly different from the southern part in terms of the fire regimes that we have. And essentially what we were doing in the beginning was trying to quantify what the key threats were in that environment and what the key biodiversity indicators or values were. So we obviously built on a depth of knowledge that national parks had developed in those environments. And essentially we had to come up with, look over the period of this project where we're delivering the reintroduction of in the Pilliga case, 6 regionally extinct species, and then also applying a range of management interventions across the whole landscape. How do we track, where the park started, and then how the levels of threats and the key biodiversity assets tracked over time following our management, the application of our particular management interventions, and that includes things like feral predator control across the whole landscape, total eradication of predators within a large fenced area, weed control, feral herbivore control, and all sorts of other things. And given the potential life of the project, which has an initial period of 10 years, but then potentially also up to 40 years, it's quite a challenge to try and develop a monitoring program which is going to be able to give you the information you require to do your adaptive management over that sort of temporal period for the vast variety and range of things that we have to measure. And that's from stuff, like vegetation features to different components of the faunal assemblage.
Yeah, so I've just shared this.
Some of that early work there was around developing that baseline, and then also scoping where we should build the fence and laying the groundwork for planning the reintroductions.
Do you want to describe what this device is that you're looking at in the photo?
Yeah, so that's an anabat detector. So that was put out there initially when we were doing sort of broad surveys just to determine what the bat assemblage was throughout the part of the park there.
Yeah, and
so it's an ultrasonic recorder that gives you a sort of profile, and you can run it through software that allows you to determine which species are present based on a library of calls that are specific to that region and environment.
So that kind of broad scale biodiversity monitoring, it's, we try and be very comprehensive to detect as many different groups as we can, and vegetation as well. That's what we call eco-health monitoring, ecological health monitoring. And it's a cornerstone of AWC's science program. In fact, listeners might have tuned in a couple of weeks ago when we spoke to John Konofsky and Liana Joseph about how important that eco-health monitoring is for AWC. I guess it gives us accountability for our own work, but also really importantly in these partnership projects, it allows us to report on the progress of our management and the impact that our management has had. Okay, so that's a really important thing to set up, and you're involved in that in the Pilliga. Mallee Cliffs is quite a different environment, and I've just got a shot here which includes the fence. Do you want to describe the habitat there and what Mallee Cliffs is like?
Yeah, so that's a nice section of the fence we've put in there. So Mallee Cliffs is about a 58,000 hectare park, Mallee Cliffs National Park. It's located in far southwestern New South Wales. It's about 45-minute drive out of Mildura there. It's unique, I guess, in the region, and it has a really strong conservation value because it hasn't experienced a large fire or other disturbance of that nature since the 70s. And that makes it stand out from some of the other mallee reserves in that part of the world, for the south in Victoria or in SA that have experienced recent large fires. So it's coming into a post-fire successional age, which is really great and desirable for a range of species like mallee fowl, western pygmy possums, and to thrive. So the dominant vegetation community there is sort of a mixed mallee assemblage of there's about 3 or 4 species that dominate the landscape with a shrubby chenopod understory, and then it's interspersed with areas of spinifex mallee on sandier ridges, and then there's also substantial areas of Balar woodland, which are a key feature in that region. They're more mature trees with a lot of hollows. They're critical for a range of bat species, and they also occur on the denser, heavier clay soils. So some of the recent work we've been doing, we've been processing some research work on bats, which show that the Balar woodland areas are disproportionately more valuable than some of the other habitats. But then when you look beyond the park boundary, they're also the more fertile areas that get cleared for agriculture. So in terms of a conservation sense, having a lot of that remnant boar within the park is really valuable for a range of species. That's the dominant veg type in the breeding area that we have, and it's proving to be a good resource for the reintroduced bilby population that we
Yeah, and Balar is that it's a local name for the casuarina there, isn't it? So it's one of these big she oak trees with, you know, I guess older trees would have hollows and the bark sort of flakes off, so lots of shelter. I showed a couple of pictures of the, you know, mallee fowl and western pygmy possum. So there's obviously already rich biodiversity there, but we know that historically there were a lot of other species there which are now missing from that landscape. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it would have looked like 200 or 300 years ago travelling through that part of the country?
Yeah, I know. So I think everyone online today will have a good understanding that, you know, we're going through another mass extinction event around the world, and that Australia leads, I guess, the mammal extinction rate. You know, prior to European settlement, the small mammal assemblage would have been much more diverse in this area, and we know that based on the records of early explorers and other sorts of evidence like fossil records or things of that nature. And you know, the critical thing is that following European settlement, we've had massive changes in habitat structure and availability, and we've also reintroduced more critically. Well, we've also introduced predators, which species have not co-adapted with over time here, like feral cats and foxes, and they've basically decimated the small mammal assemblage. So this project's pioneering in a sense that we're attempting to reintroduce these animals, and it has basically two critical components, and one is protecting the species in of themselves. So one of the species we're looking at is greater stick-nest rats. They're now limited in their there's only one island population where they formerly occurred, where they still occur. So one extant population on Franklin Island in South Australia. And, you know, if something were to happen to that population, we'd lose the last remaining extant population, and we just have a couple of reintroduced populations to rely on. So for that species, this sort of program where we're aiming to reintroduce them and protect them in a large safe haven is super critical. But the other and slightly, you know, other exciting part of I guess what this project's about, and the other really cutting edge part, is that we're looking to recreate the assemblage that once existed and restore the functions that these species had ecologically and their interactions with each other to the park. So one of the key things is that we're aiming to reintroduce 10 species through this project, and they all occupy sort of a range of different niches. They're all at different trophic levels. So we're aiming to reintroduce a predator in the western quoll. We're aiming to restore components of the rodent assemblage in greater stick-nest rats and Mitchell's hopping mice. We've got burrowing animals like the bilby and burrowing bettong. There's other surface mammals in there like western barred bandicoots, and then you know, in red-tailed phascogales, we've also got an arboreal mammal. So these critters, you know, you can see just through talking through them, they all have a critical role ecologically and in terms of their function in different parts of the environment. So we're hoping is not just, you know, beyond just conserving them as individual units, which is critical. It's more about just putting the bush back to what it would have been at that time. And this project's really exciting because, you know, beyond, I think, Mount Gibson, that level of that number of species in one place has rarely been attempted. So it's quite pioneering, and it really provides an excellent platform on which we can learn and look at how we can refine our management actions to get the best outcome for these species and for the environment itself.
Yeah, I think that is really significant that, you know, it's easy to think about conservation as preventing extinctions. This is kind of the flip side of that. We're not just stopping things going extinct, we're restoring that whole community. And that's something that's incredibly ambitious. But we've got the track record from places like Mount Gibson, from Scotia, where you are now, to to be quite confident that we can do that by removing those key threats, and feral predators are one of the main ones. So getting to that point means constructing these large fences. We've talked about them in previous webinars, but essentially 6-foot fence. Do you want to just describe the area? And I might share that that aerial photo again, but the Mallee Cliffs fence is on track to become the largest feral predator-free fenced area of its kind in Australia. And that's been a process of some years to establish that area. So there's the fence again, which you can see, 9,500 hectares. But for the initial releases, there's also a smaller breeding area within that fenced area, isn't there?
That's right, Joe. Yeah, there's an area that's about 480 hectares or so that's a component of the genetic management plan for bilbies, or genetic management advice for bilbies and bridle nail-tail wallabies, that allows animals from different sources to be mixed before they're released into the wider area. So that's an example where we're consulting with external experts in different areas to try and get the best outcomes, and that's really been a unique feature of this project. But yeah, look, the fence has been the result of 3 or 4 years of planning to do it, but the actual clearing and construction of the fence happened over a very quick period. It was incredibly efficient. We've got a world-class operations team working with us who've got vast experience in doing this work across a number of other sanctuaries, and we're able to use that experience at places like New Haven and Mount Gibson recently to help inform the process at Mallee Cliffs. But I think from the clearing to now nearly the pointy end of confirming the eradication in the near future, it's been very quick. It's almost been unprecedented, the speed at which we've been able to do that. And that's largely down to the dedication of our land management team, who've been at it every single day and putting in the hard yards, trapping, shooting, baiting, checking the fence for breaches. And it's that kind of, work that we're able to bring to this partnership, that kind of approach and experience in managing these areas and getting this type of eradication work done. It's not easy. It's going to be soon the largest area on mainland Australia that's ever been eradicated. And I think that's a really great milestone, not only just for AWC, but for conservation in general, to see that, that there are larger offshore islands where this has been done, but to do it on the mainland in this context is really a good milestone that I think we should all be, pretty proud of.
Yeah, and congratulations to your involvement in that. But as you say, also the land management team who led the establishment of that fenced area. And I think that's an important point of the partnership with New South Wales National Parks, is that that's really what we bring to that relationship. We've got a really extensive track record of constructing these sorts of feral-free areas, and we're kind of uniquely placed to deliver something like that on public land for the first time. So that's really exciting. The first time at this scale, certainly. Okay, so we've talked about establishing the fence, and then the next step, excitingly, is releases. And we were actually both there late last year, when the first species was released at Mallee Cliffs. Do you want to talk about that night?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. So that was a long time in the making, and it also involved input from AWC staff from a range of places. So we had help from guys at Ukamara. We had staff come down from New Haven, and we had also a range of other staff around the country help conduct the harvests, and they were done from 3 sites at Scotia, on Thistle Island, and from populations from various captive breeding institutions, so zoos, populations. And we basically had to coordinate those animals to fly in from all over the country, capture them up, and then move them all over a couple of week period in October 2019. So yeah, that was quite a large logistical challenge, but that seemed to go off pretty well. We ended up reintroducing 50 bilbies. So the bulk of those came from Thistle Island, with additional animals from Scotia and from the zoos. And the release went well. We fitted many of those animals with VHF telemetry to track their survival rates. We had a survival rate above 90% in that time, which is good for putting animals in these environments. And we track their condition and body weight over every 3 months in the first year. And at the most recent survey a few weeks ago, as you've probably seen in recent material that was published on this, we caught 52 animals, I think, and about 26 of those were new, unmarked animals. So when we released the initial 50, I think 17 of them had pouch young. But we've also, some of the animals we caught recently were small enough that they've also been conceived in the park and born since then. So catching 26 unmarked animals shows that as well. So that's a really great outcome. We've seen weight gains from animals from Thistle Island and Scotia since release. Those animals on average have increased in body weight and condition after release to Mallee Cliffs. So it's showing that the park's in fantastic shape and providing sufficient resources for them to be able to thrive in the short term, albeit within this smaller breeding area. So we expect when we release them into the larger area that, we'll see even better outcomes. And even the animals from the zoo, which mostly came in slightly above condition, a little bit heavier animals, quite healthier, or, given that they're in that captive setting, they initially showed overall a slight weight decline at 3 months, but at 6 months, they've picked up on average in body weight and condition, and it's now above that on release. So, even those animals are still able to do very well in that setting, Joey. So, the next trappings in a few weeks' time, and hopefully we can start to see a few of those young maturing.
It's great news, and it was really heartening to see that get some coverage too. So you may have seen it on the TV news. We circulated some of that publicity that it got. It was on ABC as well as a digital story, and that's available on our website if anyone's interested. I'll just remind you too that we'll have Q&A in a minute. So anything that you're really interested in or you'd like to ask Laurence about, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try and address those questions at the end. Laurence, it must be really rewarding to catch animals that have, been conceived and born at Mallee Cliffs. I've just got some photos here from that most recent trapping that you did. So, like all marsupials, bilbies are born very young and, basically little jelly beans that can only suck milk. That's their only function, and then they do most of their development in the pouch. So that's one of the pouch young there, and then there's that.
I mean, that's an amazing photo. So we went out a few weeks ago with Brad, who's an incredibly talented wildlife photographer that we're lucky to have on our staff, and you can see that one's still fused to the teat there. So I mean, bilbies have a very quick gestation period after conception. The animals are then born at about 15 days. And they actually have to crawl up, a little passage into the pouch, and then they attach themselves to the teat there, and then develop for a period of time. So this that one there is sort of some of the indicators of what age it's at, are sort of whether the ears are still fused, whether the eyes are still shut, whether you've got fur coming on, whether it is still fused to the teat, and you can use these sorts of indicators to look at what age that individual might be. So that's that one, it's only a few months old, if that.
And then some of these sort of teenage ones, I guess, which are so adorable. It's one of the best bilby photos I've seen, I think, taken by Brad a couple of weeks ago. Great to see the pitter-patter of little bilby claws hopping about.
Yeah, that's right. So we were catching a lot of bilbies that were around the sort of 700, 800 gram mark. A couple that were around the 500 gram mark. They were independent, so they weren't with their mothers. They're now off by themselves. But the sort of average bilby weight is more around your 1.2, 1.5 kilo range. So they're still young, sort of sub-adults. And yeah, hopefully what we're looking to see in the next trapping session is that we recapture those individuals and they've put on weight, that their health is still in good condition, that they, which is generally what we see broadly. So we're expecting that to continue. One of when you do an initial release, your monitoring is really focused on the survival of individuals. So, you need enough animals in your population to be able to breed and establish. So if you have a lot of deaths following reintroduction, it's not going to work out. So if you have a high survival rate, which we did, you can then shift your focus in monitoring into population growth and health and condition. So that's where we're at now. We're developing and using technologies like camera traps to come up with ways of more accurately estimating the density of the population. So we've got a threshold that we think is suitable in terms of population size to be maintained within that 480 hectare breeding area. Once it reaches that threshold, which is about 110 animals, we'll then conduct another translocation into the wider fenced area once that's been declared feral free and the appropriate approvals are obtained. So yeah, being able to quantify the population size is pretty important. But there are some challenges in doing that with traditional methods in a smaller area. So we're hoping to try and use camera traps to do that, coupled with some statistics that we've been able to develop as a consequence of the feral cat project that we've been investing in around the country. So that work is feeding back into, and being applied in a slightly different context into measuring the population size of reintroduced mammals. But we're able to use that experience and that organisational knowledge to try and get outcomes in that area as well.
Yeah, just touching on technology there, we're also employing this coded VHF, which it's quite complex, but essentially, well, you're probably better at explaining it than me.
Yes, so one of the critical things you want to do when you release animals, like I mentioned before, is to determine what the survival rate of your founders are. So you can do that with coded VHF, which is relatively simple in some ways. It's it's got a fixed frequency. There's a battery unit and it's a transmitter, so it transmits. All the collars are on the same, or the units. With Bilby's, we actually mounted them onto the tail. Because it's more out of the way of the animal, it's more suitable. And we actually found them staying on for about 3 months, which was a bit longer than had been previously found in some areas. But the transmitters are all on the same frequency. You've got a base station, which you can see at the bottom of that photo there, that's scanning that one frequency. There you go, that's the receiver unit. And then each tag has a digital code that it sends out. So you can identify individuals when they come within range of that tower, which for these Bilby tags, they're only about 10 grams. But the range was with that 8-meter tower there, which was expertly crafted by our local operations manager, Bruce, did the job well, is about a range of about just over 1 kilometre. So within that area, we can get a pretty good coverage, and we can supplement that with a vehicle mounted unit that drives around. And that worked fabulously well. So those units are largely just prototypes that we're getting through Low-Tech, one of the suppliers we work with. And that's worked really well. So we'll continue to roll that out for a range of other species. And, that also builds on pioneering work. I guess this was first applied with Marla at New Haven. It's been used in other reintroductions there. And we've had staff in the southeast sort of pioneering and driving that. And that's another strength of within AWC, as we're learning from experience on other properties and applying it here. It's also the same system we've got set up in the Pilliga with the nail tails and Bilby's there, and it worked, really, really well. So that's a good application of technology that gets the sort of data we need to make sensible management decisions. And in the case of that, it also reduces the sort of workload on the ground so that we can be more effective in how we allocate our time in this critical period after release. Gone are the days that you have to spend out in the burning sun all day just trying to find animals. If you set this up in a sensible way, you can get that high quality data whilst being able to use your time a bit more effectively.
So it sounds like the Bilbys are becoming well established, at least within that smaller breeding area. And, I guess now the time's come to plan the next reintroductions. What are the species next on the list for reintroduction at Mallee Cliffs?
Yeah, so the bilby is one of the good species you want to get in nice and early because they're an ecosystem engineering animal. They dig burrows, which will then create refuges for subsequent species to follow once you've reintroduced those. We've got animals that are we've been using captive breeding to amplify some populations of animals. So that has an advantage with the greater stick-nest rat that we harvested a small number from the remnant population, which minimises the impact on that source. And then you can use captive breeding to increase the numbers. One of the critical determinants of whether a translocation is successful or not is the number of founders that you release. That the higher the number, generally, that's correlated with increased successful establishment, as well as the area being predator-free. That's also a key determinant of translocation success. That's why translocations into these fenced areas are often more successful. And although it's a large investment, they're a critical tool in many cases. Translocations themselves can often fail, but within fenced areas, we see a disproportionate amount of success relatively. So yeah, the next sort of species is going to be the stick-nest rat. They're coming through a breeding program at Monado Zoo that we're fortunate to be partnered with the really talented team down there, and they've got probably about 40 or 50 rats for us to release towards the end of the year in August, and then there'll be a follow-up release a couple of months later. That'll be a soft release. So once you release an animal into the environment, there's different sort of translocation tactics you can employ. So for some species, you'll do a soft release where you put them into a more contained, controlled area where you can perhaps provide supplementary food or other things that you can control and keep a closer eye on them for an initial period to help them adapt before you release them. And then there's a hard release, which is what we do with the majority of species, where we're going from the wild at somewhere like Scotia to the wild at somewhere like Mallee Cliffs. You can pick them up and move them. If the conditions are broadly similar, that's a very effective way of just getting a transition. But yeah, we're looking at stick-nest rats being one of the next species before moving on to trying to get numbats in around the end of the year.
Yeah, fantastic. It's great progress there at Mallee Cliffs. Laurence,
yeah,
we'll come to Q&A in a minute. So yeah, if anyone has to duck off, just don't forget that you can catch up on our website. That's australianwildlife.org. You can even just Google AWC in conversation. We're big enough now that we pop up in the search engine, where this is our 10th episode of AWC in conversation. And we've covered a whole range of different things, from fire management in the Kimberley, chatting to the CEO, Tim Allard, last week. We talked to Chantel about reintroductions at New Haven. We talked to Eri about the bushfire recovery project on Kangaroo Island, constructing a fence there very quickly. So there's a whole range of great conversations up on the website there that I encourage you to go and check out if you missed any of them. Okay, we'll take some questions now. Before we do, the ephemeral question on everyone's lips: how can I help? And the answer is you can donate to support our work at australianwildlife.org. So we're carrying out these translocations across multiple sites. As Laurence has described, it's expensive work. But on our website, if you make a donation before the end of June, that will be tax deductible. And you can choose which projects you're most interested in, or make a general donation at that page. We also always get questions about visiting sanctuaries. At the moment, we don't have facilities to host visitors at Mallee Cliffs. Ordinarily, when it's not a pandemic, we can host visitors at places like Karakamaya in southwest WA. We've got guided walks there. Many of you will know of Mornington in the Kimberley on the Fitzroy River. All of our sanctuaries are currently closed to visitation because of the coronavirus, and we'll let you know with updates on our website as soon as that situation changes. But we hope to host visitors back on site at some of our sanctuaries soon. Okay. The first question we've got here is from Linda, and Linda asks, how do we prove that feral cats are completely eliminated before doing reintroductions into these fenced areas? So what's the process of that?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and you definitely don't want to be going ahead and doing this stuff when you've still got that risk out there. We see that even one cat can have a massive effect on these small mammals in one night. So what we do is the land management team put together a really detailed eradication plan to underpin their work. And this goes on over a period of time. And, whilst they're doing the baiting, trapping, shooting type management to remove them, they also undertake a pretty detailed monitoring at the same time. And that's also used to inform where they target certain areas. So the primary tool we use out at Mallee Cliffs, or what's been used, is track dragging. The surface is very sandy, so you can drag a couple of tyres behind a ute and then go back the next day and look at where you're getting prints. So that shows you sort of the patterns of activity. We also supplement that with camera traps and other general sightings and spotlighting and things like this. And that goes on over a period of time. And then once the land management team are pretty sure that they've not got any more detections from those tracks or from the cameras, we basically set up a period of intensive monitoring that went for 2 or 3 months. So you declare what we call interim feral-free status, and that happened a couple of months back, where they say, right, we're pretty sure we've got the last fox, and that was a pretty big milestone for us. And getting that last fox really involved a lot of effort from a lot of people, just weeks and weeks of trapping and carefully tracking down using, the tracks and the cameras, and the whole team really working together with old school and new school techniques, as our sanctuary managers told me yesterday. And that really contributed to the outcome. And then once you've declared, that interim feral free, there's a period of intensive monitoring, where you put all of your effort into tracking and dragging and searching and checking cameras regularly, going around trying to do, shooting and whistling for animals, looking for them to come out. And then once you've had confidence, you declare that, it's feral free. And then even after that, there's still a period of monitoring that you continue. And critically with these areas, it's not a put up and build and leave solution. It's something that needs constant work over time. So even here at Scotia, the fence is surveyed for breaches and signs of activity every three times a week, right? So having the boots on the ground in the long term to monitor these areas is really critical. And that monitoring regime just continues indefinitely now.
So it's a pretty rigorous and arduous process, I guess. That's, we really do need to be confident that before any reintroductions take place, these areas are free of feral predators. Just on that though, another person picked me up. I must have said predator-free rather than feral predator-free. And important to note that there are still native predators here. There are big goannas, there are pythons in this part of the world. It'll be interesting to see what their interactions are like with these reintroduced native mammals too. Will that be part of the monitoring as well?
100%, Joey. So that's something that we factor into the translocation plans, and that's something that we monitor as part of our eco-health program. An important point here is that these are wild areas. Whilst there is management going on in there, there are processes like disease that we, once we manage it, it is a component of the environment. There's predation that goes on. So the extant fauna, the varanids, the elapids, the raptors, they're still out there in the environment. And as I alluded to at the start of the conversation, we're about restoring these trophic relationships. So one of the mammals we're aiming to put back in next year is Mitchell's hopping mouse. They're a very small animal, and they're going to be an important component of the food web. And some of our native predators are becoming threatened in of themselves. So we've got things in the Mallee Cliffs environment, like spotted harriers, for example, that will benefit from this program. And we keep a close track on threatened extant fauna, but generally we expect the project to have a benefit for the majority of them. And that's something that we track pretty closely. But that's a key point. There are still predators in the fence, the native ones, albeit, but we don't expect that to be a problem because many of these mammals have co-evolved with those native predators over time, and that's the key point of difference to things like feral cats and foxes, is that our native critters just haven't evolved mechanisms to deal with them in the amount of time that they've been here. Yeah.
And you mentioned the western quoll, which is a sort of medium-sized native predator, a marsupial. I presume you introduce them at the end once all the other ones are established. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, the translocation planning process is pretty complex. It's very rigorous. There's a lot of things to consider, and it's essentially, a highly developed risk assessment is in there around various things. But yeah, look, Western quolls are something that we'll be looking to reintroduce once populations of other species are well established. And there'll be initial trial for that release where there'll be a small number of individuals that are intensively monitored to look at what their impacts are, whether it is beneficial or detrimental to the other species that we've reintroduced. And just, it's something that we'll take slowly and do carefully and put a lot of time and investment into monitoring that really closely. But, that is an exciting part of restoring the trophic relationships. There would have been predation from other small mammals and other native predators in the environment over time. So yeah, hopefully we're looking at trying to find out a way to restore that. But there isn't an instruction book to doing this sort of stuff. There's no manual that says how to set up a reintroduction project. But it's something that we're continually learning on and adapting and building on our experience at other places. And yes, refining and adapting based on the results of our monitoring and feedback from the vast team of people involved in this within and outside AWC and all of the other stakeholders that we consult and all of the other experts that we work with to try and come out the best solution here.
Another question here is asking about a scenario where a fire is threatening a fenced area like this. What sort of work are we putting in place now to avoid that situation or to help us deal with the situation of the fire threatening the fenced area?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I mean, Mallee Cliffs National Park stands out in the region because it's not been affected by a really large conflagration since the mid-70s. As part of our contract and partnership with national parks, we're there to deliver this species reintroduction program and whole of park land management. But national parks still play the core role in the emergency response and planning and delivery of fire. So that's a really exciting part and component of the project where we get to work much more closely together with each other. So at Mallee Cliffs, there's some burns coming up in the next couple of months where we're particularly aiming to put in what in fire lingo you call strategic fire advantage zones. So these are strip sort of burns in key areas along the fence lines and also within the fence to, that provide avenues of low fuel to support fire management activities and suppression in the event that there is a large fire that comes and burns through. And hopefully if there is a large fire, that those sorts of management interventions and low fuel areas help to break it up. So we know that diversity in fire patterns after a fire is critical to fauna recovery. And also, whilst fire is beneficial in many ways, you want a diverse pattern at the end of the fire. So, yeah, these are sorts of things we're putting in and we're working together to try and achieve that. And that will be delivered with, parks and AWC staff working together on the ground at that time. So there is that, but it's, something that takes a lot of planning and has to be done very carefully.
Yeah. Okay. Another question here. Just asking about the fence itself, so the structure of the fence and how we ensure that animals don't climb over. For a lot of people, you'll be familiar with the design of these fences, but we're talking about a 6 foot high, basically chicken wire fence with a finer grade of mesh on the lower half, which includes a skirt, which runs parallel to the fence along the ground, perpendicular along the ground at the base of the fence. That means that animals can't burrow under it. It's also got hot wires running along at an offset from the main mesh part of the fence, which was about 7,000 volts, I think. So, it's enough to deter animals climbing up the fence. And then on top, it's got a thing called a floppy top. So it's an unstable top, which hangs over towards the outside of the fence. And for a cat or an animal trying to climb up, that really destabilizes their footing. And so by the time they've got to there, they would have had to have dodged, 2 electric wires, been able to climb an overhang. We've never had a breach of this kind of fence design at any AWC sites. So, that's it'd be multiple decades of time looking at the history of all of those fenced areas. So we're confident that the design of these fences doesn't allow animals to get from the outside in, or certainly not cats and foxes. But maintenance is critical there. So, we have to make sure that we're checking the fence regularly, making sure that the power is still on, all that kind of thing. The bigger risk is actually with gates and making sure that we're enforcing, good protocols around opening and closing gates when there are different people visiting and things like that. We've had multiple questions about rabbits. Laurence, are rabbits a big problem at Mallee Cliffs? Will they be able to be removed from that fenced area as well?
That's right. So, in addition to the predators, we're also looking to remove introduced herbivores. So we've done that through goats. And there is an intense rabbit control effort going on at the moment. There's the operations team have put in a huge effort to map all of the known warrens within the fence, and that was doing thousands of kilometres of transects across the 9,500 hectare area, and they've mapped those, and now we're going through a process of closing and removing active warrens and treating the rabbits to try and reduce them to pretty much eradicate them and reduce them the levels that we can deal with. But it is in of itself quite a challenging process. We're also retaining some of the abandoned rabbit warrens because they're valuable features for reintroductions. The Bilbys, once we released them, interestingly, we saw them move into available warren structures immediately after release. They're obviously abandoned old warrens. We've had calicivirus come through the park in the last few years, and the general drought conditions in some of the areas have contributed to low rabbit numbers. But Bilbys were able to capitalise on that, which is interesting because in some parts of the country, it was thought that rabbits coming in were a contributing factor to Bilbys declining, and now rabbits being there have actually helped the Bilbys to get a footing in the new environment. So sort of a bit of a twist further down the track. But broadly the aim is to eradicate rabbits, and the ops team are doing their best to put the foot on the gas and get through that so that we can make substantial progress before reintroducing numbats at the end of the year.
Great. We've got lots of questions coming in, and I apologise to anyone whose question we don't address today. We will try and get back to you with some information about what you've asked about, but there's just not time to address all of these. So we'll take a couple more before we leave it. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. Okay, so a question here just about survival rate, and you may have covered this, Laurence, but the survival rate from that initial reintroduction, what was that like at the 3-month and 6-month periods?
So, the survival rate that we tracked with the telemetry equipment was for basically a 3-month period. So that was the time that the tail-mounted transmitters were still taped on at the Bilbys. And that's really the initial period. From most translocations around the place, what we see is actually the critical period for determining whether or not the animals are going to continue to survive in your environment is about a month. If your animals can find shelter, find food, and they're still alive at a month, they're probably going to go all right in the longer term if you've released enough of them, right? And essentially that's what we're seeing. So like I mentioned before, we had a 90% or higher survival rate. The animals that died were mostly from zoos or captive settings and just failed to adjust, or they were quite old in some cases. But on the whole, they were fit and have established. And now at the 3-month period, what we've seen is an improvement in condition. And then at 6 months, we're seeing the same animals that we're capturing again. What we're doing is setting up a natural population now. So now that it's established and there's clear signs that it's growing, it's going in the right direction. So from us, animals becoming old and dying is part of the process and population dynamics in a wild natural population. And as long as we've got that recruitment, can see that in this time that the population's going in the right trajectory and that it's being able to establish. That's mainly what we're concerned on at present. And then in the future, we move to an overall population monitoring approach. So that allows us to manage the populations appropriately and respond to make sure that the whole project's viable in the long term.
And another question here. This one's about the fence, which I just described, and the cost of installing and constructing a fence like that. We've now got quite a lot of experience doing these fence projects. So Mount Gibson, New Haven, Scotia, of course, Pilliga, Mallee Cliffs, and the recent bushfire recovery project on Kangaroo Island. And basically, we budget $30,000 to $50,000 per kilometre for that design of fence. So it is a substantial upfront investment, but if you look at the ecological return in terms of, you know, the native populations that infrastructure can support, you know, it's a huge return on investment. So for us, that's a key part of our conservation model of restoring populations of native mammals. We know that for some species, like some of the bettongs, they simply can't survive anywhere where there are even low levels of feral predators. And so, you know, we think that these fences need to be part of the solution. But of course, we're also looking at, you know, outside the fence research into how we can reduce the impact of feral predators without fenced areas too. So it's part of a broad strategy to deal with that threat. Okay, a final question here, Laurence, to you. So do you live on site and travel to the different sanctuaries, or how does it work? Because you're at Scotia at the moment, but you also work at Mallee Cliffs, you've worked in the Pilliga. How does it work? Where are you based?
Yep, so I'm sort of based wherever I'm needed, Joey. So I lived in Narrabri for a few years, based in town there. And at Mallee Cliffs and Pilliga, we've not yet developed the operations bases. As part of AWC's contribution to these projects, we're putting up bases at each of those sites. So that's something that we're bringing to the table as part of a co-contribution to, I guess, the funding arrangement we have with the New South Wales government. You know, I think going back to your last point that you're talking about there, you know, the fact that there's a state government interested in investing in this, and the WA government's also investing in it, as are other state governments increasingly looking at fencing and restoration projects, and the federal government too, that, you know, this is being recognised as a critical intervention. You're right, it's one part of a multifaceted approach, and AWC is also investing in other areas, in fire management, in, you know, buying up suitable parts of land, in various control options. It's not the only thing. You know, recent work at Mount Gibson is showing that we're working towards outside the fence releases. But you're right, for a number of species, if we don't have these fenced areas in the short term, they're just not going to be here by the time we get to a better option, right? I mean, but they are managed in a careful way, and monitoring and is a critical part of just making sure that we're on track. You know, we're still learning about these fences. We're learning from Scotia and Mount Gibson about how populations respond, how that response varies locally under different conditions. But it's an exciting project. It's recognised as a cutting edge tool for us to use, and in the case of these species, you know, it's really a critical piece of conservation, particularly in the southeast of Australia, where we've got, you know, habitat loss and a lot of really ramped up conservation threats, given the high density of settlement in this part of the country, at least. So to be down here doing it, it's critical for the conservation of our iconic and threatened charismatic mammals that we're doing this kind of work. And yeah, the team basically at Mallee Cliffs, we're working towards developing an ops base. We live mostly in town. So there's the ecology and operations team are working out of Mildura for Mallee Cliffs, and we make the drive each day. But within the next year or so, we will start to roll out the operations base on site and sort of move towards more of the boots on the ground model that AWC has more widely. But yeah, also move around Scotia and other places as needed. You know, the success of these projects is, you know, we've got a good local team, but we also have lots of feedback, and we work together as one large organisation to try and get this stuff achieved. You know, so we've had feedback and input from people all around the country, particularly in the science program, you know, to get the best outcomes. And we try and sap up that experience of people from the different sanctuaries and who've done this stuff as well. And yeah, I think that's reflected in the success we've been having at present. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Laurence. I think we'll leave it there. We're right on Well, we've gone a little bit over time, but that was a fascinating discussion about the progress being made at Mallee Cliffs. I think you and your team can be really proud of the progress, and especially having a thriving population of bilbies in an area where they were extinct up until the end of last year. That's a huge achievement. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks, Joey, and thanks everyone for their support. We couldn't do a lot of this work without the amazing support that we have from everyone who donates and everyone else who likes and promotes our work. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much. And if you would like to make a donation, especially before the end of June, you've only got a few days left, you can log on to our website, australianwildlife.org. As Laurence mentioned, building operations bases, both in the Pilliga and at Mallee Cliffs, is a major priority for us, but it's going to cost money, and that will enable our staff to be based on the ground so that they can be more responsive to what's needed and to, especially maintaining populations of those species once they're reintroduced. So I encourage you to make a donation if you haven't yet. You can also read our magazine, Wildlife Matters, on the website. So just go to australianwildlife.org and look for Wildlife Matters. This has been the 10th episode of AWC in Conversation, our live webinar series. And we're going to take a short break. So we'll call that season 1, but we'll be back in a few weeks' time. So on the 23rd of July, we'll return with a second season of AWC in Conversation. I really hope you'll join me then. Thank you, everyone, for all of your support of our work. It's important work. And I hope you'll join me again in July to hear more about our projects around Australia to conserve Australian wildlife. Thank you very much. I'll see you then.